Good morning to all of you. We'd like to warmly welcome you on behalf of the German History Museum, and I am the head of the foundation of the museum and will be one of the speakers of the symposium. So, dear speakers at today's symposium, dear moderators, ladies and gentlemen, and I am happy to see you so numerously here today, despite the rain and all other adversities, to listen to our symposium, Nature and German History, Faith, Biology and Power. This is indeed the sixth symposium that we organize in our series Historical Judgment. We started out 6 years ago in 2018 talking about an exhibit, which are the Pillars of Cape Cross. And then we were talking about some focus on the documenta that led to some controversial debate. Independently of that, we still organize it here in our house. And then we talked about the possibility to exhibit violence and other issues that have been included in our exhibitions as well as today. And today we will talk about German history and what people understood by nature throughout German history and how this term has changed in its definition, who was able to define what is nature, who had access to what was regarded as nature. And we are starting, as you can see, we're not only starting out in the 20th century with the industrial age, but we go way back to the modern era and even back to the Middle Ages. So just a few stepstones about the term.
Natur ist, das werden die Expertinnen.
And the experts might know it. It has entered the German language as a foreign word from the Latin verb nasti and its participium natus, as well as the noun naturam. In 1863, the school teacher Dr. Johannes Clasen wrote on the history of the word nature in a commemorative publication for the centenary of the Senckenberg Foundation in Frankfurt. And I quote, "It needs no reminder that in the word nature, which has completely become the property of our German language, we do not possess a word that has grown out of it, but that we have borrowed it from Latin with all the educated languages of Europe and fused it most intimately with our entire vocabulary and linguistic usage." If one would open the German dictionary of 1889, which was initiated by the brothers Grimm, you will notice the following. The word nature was initially neither widespread in German language, nor was it particularly popular. The dictionary states, we say that in nature we were referring to a disposition or an aptitude or something that we would call a naturel. And so the school teacher, Clasen, as well as the editors of the dictionary report that there were repeated attempts to replace Natur with a German word, referring to Zeugemutter, which would be the begetting or the procreating mother, and Urwesenheit, which would be a primordial being. And so we're quite happy that this has not been the case, because otherwise it would have been called quite complicatedly Zeugemutter in Deutsche Geschichte, begetting mother in German history. And I quote the German dictionary, "The old High German attempts to translate the Latin natura by a native word were of no lasting effect, and the attempts of the purists to put a German word in its place have always remained unsuccessful." But why did the word nature find so little use in the German language before its rise in the 15th century? Let's take a look at the Dictionary of Basic Historical Terms you are all familiar with. In the entry on history, nature is discussed over many pages, with a view to the Christian-influenced Middle Ages. It is stated, and I quote, Hildegard von Bingen speaks of nature as a creation that has grown and lives in the hands of the Creator God. The universe appears as an independently active nature, end of quote. In fact, there was another common word in the Middle Ages that covered a wider range of meanings than nature, which was creation, and Latin creatio, in the age of faith. And faith, together with biology and power, are one of the key concepts of our symposium. So nature was understood as creation. The meaning of this was interpreted differently, for example, in the theology of Hildegard von Bingen or in the business books of the Hanseatic League, which traded in natural products. We will hear more about both this afternoon. Here. And with that, we will move on to the 15th and 16th century. The concept of nature begins to expand. It soon encompasses the entirety of what had grown and become all landscapes with flora and fauna, as well as the cosmos, the stars, and planets. At the same time, nature was understood by scholars at universities and courts as a system for which laws had been issued by God. The astronomer Johannes Kepler, for example, called them laws taken from geometry. In the following centuries, debate about the concept of laws of nature would develop from Leibniz to Kant, Schelling, and Hegel. The debate revolved around two questions mainly. How autonomous are the laws of nature, and why and how can we recognize them? In the 18th century, the concept of nature took a new turn. This change is now less to do with the spectrum of meaning than with the evaluation of nature. Nature becomes the ideal. The already quoted school teacher mentions Rousseau as an important factor. The teachings of the French Enlightenment philosopher. In the German-speaking world, Johann Gottfried Herder was influential in advocating the thesis that human societies should strive for a state of nature. Another turn comes around 1800, and now a specifically German one. The idealized nature is in a second idealization elevated to a national character. So it moves to the interior, inwards again, and to the center of the concept of nation. So, and it becomes quite obvious in the lectures from Johann Gottlieb Fichte, speeches to the German nation held in Berlin in December 1807, as you know, at the time of the French occupation. And I quote, "Naturalness on the German side, arbitrariness and artificiality on the part of foreign countries are the basic differences. Abroad, this unnaturalness comes into its life of its own accord because it has originally and in one main respect deviated from nature." This naturalization of an allegedly German nature and of foreign unnature found a large following in the 19th century. The valorization often goes hand in hand with a radical devaluation of those who are not counted among them. In Fichte's case, it was the French and the Jews. With the debate about the theory of evolution ushers in an era that we place under the heading of biology in the 19th century. In December 1859, Charles Darwin's book On the Origin of Species was published, which was already translated 1 year later in 1860. As in all countries, in Germany, the debate surrounding Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is quite contradictory. The state issues the so-called biology ban in 1882. In Prussia, this banned the teaching of biology in the upper grades of grammar schools, and the legislation was primarily directed against the teaching of the theory of evolution. However, this biology ban did not prevent Chancellor Otto von Bismarck from joining forces with the most famous and vocal advocate of the theory of evolution in Germany, Ernst Haeckel. Ernst Haeckel awarded Bismarck an honorary doctorate in Jena, and when Bismarck spoke to the rectors of German universities in 1895, he put a so-called metaphorical honor on nature, and I quote Bismarck on that: "Struggle is everywhere. Without struggle, there is no life. And if we want to continue to live, we must also be prepared for further battles." End of quote. But Bismarck was not the only one to include the concept of nature in the arsenal of political weapons. All political debates of the 19th century now had to deal with the question of how the demands related to the concept of nature, from the class question to the emancipation, the farmers, women, and Jews. Germany's relationship with Asia or Africa was also negotiated with regard to the concept of nature, with a view to possible colonies and the colonized. The answers to these questions often varied. One of the most clear-sighted critics of an ideological concept of nature was Gustav Landauer, the Jewish writer and later politician of the Munich Council Republic. As early as 1904, Landau wrote that appealing to nature often involved the strategy of rediscovering commandments and prohibitions as an alleged law of nature, and proving that, and I quote, proving that nature has a root that we actually had to prescribe. In 1933, this prescription, this imposition, gained the upper hand. The ideological appropriation of nature became one of the foundations of Nazi dictatorship, which wanted to bring both external and internal nature and its power of definition and control with a myriad of laws. The so-called Nuremberg racial laws are not by chance issued the same year as the Reich Nature Conservation Act in 1935. So the title motive of this conference also shows relics from the Nazi era. In the photograph, you can see the overgrown remains of the Reich Highway near Grevendorf between Fulda and Würzburg. The words were discontinued in 1939, and the artist Laura Paget photographed them in March 2024. The construction of the Nazi freeway was transfigured into a German nature conservation project. This is something you will learn more about this afternoon in our symposium, and also more about the extent of the destruction and annihilation that followed the ideologization of nature in the Nazi era. I will leave my overview at that and thank all the speakers and moderators for their willingness to discuss the topic of nature in German history from so many different viewpoints. The conference office, led by Jenny Jakubik and Christian Berend, would like to thank you for organizing this conference. And then we have Julia Voss and the editors of the magazine Historische Urteilskraft, which is historical judgment, that I would like to show you here. You can acquire it over at the desk where the different inputs are already included. Of course, not the discussion. And then I would like to thank Ilka Linz for the conceptualization and support. I would especially like to thank and have to thank Niklaus Weikert and Christiane Weikert for their generous willingness to support this conference and the 5 previous symposiums in our magazine financially and to make it possible.
Sie sind leider heute nicht da.
Unfortunately, they cannot be with us today, but you might have seen the magazine. They will read it, but because of health reasons, they could unfortunately not join us today. And I would like to end with an announcement. In November 2025, we will have an exhibition here in our grounds, which will also be dedicated to the topic of nature and German history. So we have convened today because this is one of our big hopes that from the discussions, from your input, from your presentation, so we will draw some conclusions, and this will be a benefit for the upcoming exhibition. So thank you so much for your interest, and I wish you and all of us a very insightful day. Thank you.